You're out of uniform now, but your injuries are still there. The knee locking up during your kid's soccer game, your back pain wakes you up more nights than it doesn't. You've tried dealing with the VA, but the bureaucracy is overwhelming and you feel stuck, frustrated, and maybe even a bit hopeless. But what if you didn't have to have it be that way? Today, our guest, Dr. Adam Weissman, the founder of REE Medical, breaks down the confusing VA disability process and shows you how you could finally get the rating that you deserve without the stress. Before we begin, though, I do want to take a moment to raise awareness for something deeply important to our community, the Global War on Terrorism Memorial Foundation. You've heard me talk about it before. This organization is working to build a permanent national memorial in Washington, D.C. to honor the service members, families, and civilians who were impacted by the global war on terrorism. This memorial serves as both a tribute to those who served and a way to ensure that their sacrifices are recognized and remembered for generations to come. If you want to learn more or find out how you can support the mission, visit gwatmemorialfoundation.org. Now let's dive into today's conversation. Dr. Adam Weissman, welcome to Drive On. Really excited to have you here. Really looking forward to discussing the work that you guys do with REE Medical and your work with veterans. Really looking forward to this conversation. So welcome to the show.
Thanks, Scott. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get into the conversation and the episode and everything, I just want to let the listeners know that I've personally worked with REE Medical. And through your guys, your team's help, was able to get my VA disability rating increased from what it was. And so when we do discuss benefits, I'm well aware of what those benefits are, and just want to make sure that the listeners know that I'm familiar with it. This is not just you coming on the show and doing a advertisement for REE Medical or anything like that. I've used the service. I have seen the benefits from it, and highly do recommend it. But I want to have you be able to answer some of the listeners' questions, for things that they may not be aware of and stuff like that. So maybe just to start off, for the listeners who might not know about REE Medical, can you explain a little bit about REE Medical, kind of the background and what you guys do?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, happy to do so. Really, to start with, my background is I'm an emergency room physician, retired from clinical medicine, but I did a couple decades of emergency medicine, which is really where this came from, because I also have some experience working with active duty Marines and veterans and so forth. And I got approached by veterans to help them with their disability services. They were fighting the fight, so to speak, with the VA, trying to get the benefits that they felt they earned and deserved, and were running into bureaucracy and roadblocks and so forth. So I started doing exams on them, medical exams, filling out their disability paperwork, which one thing led to another. Now we have REE Medical. And so what we'll do is we will intake veterans, and we'll collect their medical records with their assistants, both VA medical records and personal or private medical records, compile all that, and then coordinate an examination with a non-VA but appropriate specialty physician, maybe psych if they have PTSD or anxiety or other disabilities like that, or medical for their back pain and other issues. So we'll coordinate the exam with a physician local to them in any of the 50 states, or internationally if they happen to have moved, and then prep the paperwork for the physician. The physician will do a history and physical, put all that together on completed DBQs. Those are those disability benefit questionnaires that are needed, and the veteran will take them and submit them to the VA, and the VA will make that determination as far as what's an appropriate disability rating for them today.
Yeah, and from my experience, that was the thing that kind of set REE Medical apart from some of the other options that might be out there, going through like a VSO or, doing it on your own and working directly with the VA just on your own, is that you guys had the physicians available who were able to understand what the whole process looked like. And like, if I was to just make an appointment with a doctor, random civilian doctor, to just go get, back pain or knee pain or, whatever evaluated, they're not going to know really what the VA is looking for necessarily. They're not familiar with the process. They're not familiar with the forms and the terminology that the VA might be looking for. Yet the doctors that you guys have that you can set folks up with, they're familiar with the process. They know what it is that needs to be put in there for an accurate rating. And I say that in that way because sometimes I feel like people think that, oh, well, you're just trying to scam the system and just trying to jump straight to 100% rating, even if you're not 100% actually, the issue is not 100%. What the doctors do is they understand, this is the guidelines or the rules and regulations that the VA has, and this is reality with this individual veteran, and let's match it up and let's put in the language that the VA needs to know to say, yeah, okay, they're rated at maybe 60%, maybe that's what they deserve, or whatever the correct number is, but based on reality. And that's where those appointments come in handy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. A lot of physicians, private medical physicians, as an example, don't like doing disability evaluations. If you have knee pain, they're perfectly happy to diagnose and treat your knee pain.
Mm-hmm.
But filling out disability paperwork, most physicians don't like doing that. It can be a lot of paperwork. It can be time consuming. They feel like there's some liability they're going to inherit forever because they're maybe giving you a disability rating that's going to stick with you and so forth. Additionally, although the VA has a lot of doctors they work with, they have capacity problems, right? They may or may not like doing disability exams, but they're busy, like many physicians are busy. So we've actually been very careful in selecting doctors of the right specialty, making sure they have the appropriate skills and training so that they can do these evaluations, making sure that they have the time and availability so that when somebody's ready for their exam, generally they're getting in to see those doctors in 1 or 2 weeks, our doctors,
Yeah.
and not waiting months and months for that to maybe see the right doctor, maybe see the wrong doctor. So we're very careful in selecting that way and making sure also that they know the right wording. What's interesting is the VA rater, the employee that works for the VA that's making these determinations, they're not physicians themselves. They are trained in looking for key words on these disability forms so that they can ascribe an appropriate disability rating, 40% for this verbiage, 20% for that verbiage, whatever it might happen to be. And so if a veteran sees a doctor that doesn't know the correct wording to accurately describe it, that veteran is very likely to end up with a poor outcome, something that doesn't match their level of disability.
Right. And sometimes I've heard this from other folks too who have gone through the process. As a matter of fact, this is my situation too. So it's not just other people that I've heard from. This I can speak from experience that I've gone through the process and did it on my own before I knew about REE Medical, and I was like, you know what, I'll figure this out. I'll just I'm a pretty smart guy. I can manage these types of things, but again, I like the language that was put in there was not the right language, and so that cost me a lower rating, and didn't get the rating that I should have had. And so for the longest time I just thought that, oh well, that's just what I'm supposed to have, right? And then I started I met your team a few months ago, and got into kind of some of the details, and they're like, yeah, you probably could stand to have someone take another look at this, and we might be able to get you an increase on that rating. And so that's exactly what happened, and that's exactly what they did. And so a lot of times their veterans will be out there and just accept the fact that, oh, okay, I only got 20% for this, it must only be a 20% rating. Well, it could just be that whatever it is that you put in your paperwork and in your filing is just not 100% accurate either.
Yeah, and think of the opportunity cost. If you technically should rank at 60%, 80%, 100%, and you're living at some lower rating, you could be losing out on hundreds or sometimes thousands of dollars a month for potentially years.
Yeah.
And so there's a huge opportunity cost there. And like to your point, sometimes people understand that it just didn't work out. Sometimes people get frustrated and throw in the towel and stop fighting the fight. And then there's some people who just don't recognize the fact that they actually deserve a higher rating than they have.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, it's not to say that nobody's at an accurate rating level. There are plenty of people that are, but unfortunately, there are a huge number of people who are underrated, which is a problem.
Yeah, exactly. And to your point, that could cost someone thousands of dollars a year potentially, depending on what their rating is. And so when you're when you're in some cases relying on that could make a huge difference in the amount of money coming in for you. So to me, those are the types of veterans that will benefit the most from working with REE Medical. Either the folks who are underrated and not getting the benefits that they deserve, or the folks who perhaps haven't even filed at all because the whole process is just cumbersome, and who wants to deal with that, right? And so going through a company like REE Medical, what you guys do is, in my experience, you have taken the stress completely off the veteran. Just a little bit about my experience. Your team actually went so far as to have screenshots of the VA's website and saying, click here, submit here, it was with like things circled on the screenshots. And so like, I didn't even really have to think about where do I even need to go. If they just said, submit this to the VA, I might not know where to go, but they showed exactly where to go step by step along the whole way. And so it's that level of detail and care that they took that made it just so stress-free and painless, really. And in a short amount of time, the rating came back as an increase. And I felt like it was just such a great opportunity.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who are not very tech savvy, whether you're an older veteran or even a younger veteran. And there's also plenty of people who just aren't successful in navigating that whole system. I will say this, the huge majority of veterans that come to us do so after they've tried to do it on their own with the VA, or for that matter, utilized a veteran service organization, and for whatever reason that wasn't successful. Sometimes they'll even use an accredited attorney, a VA accredited attorney, and didn't have success and end up with us. We're happy to take on people who haven't tried any of those avenues, but having said that, the majority of them have tried and have been unsuccessful for various reasons. Maybe they went through the process and it took 5 years, or maybe they were unsuccessful or only had a nominal increase and they don't feel like that matches their current level of disability. But for whatever reason, it just wasn't successful. And that's why we have this business. That's why we want to support people, because it shouldn't be hard, right? These are people who earn these benefits, who deserve these benefits. And a lot of times their whole lifestyle is based on these benefits. Disabled veterans may have difficulty working. They may have difficulty driving to work, staying calm at work, physically being able to do whatever job they have, and so forth. So getting the right benefit level and the right amount of support that they need is critical.
Yeah, for sure. And to your point, a lot of veterans, what you were saying before, may not be super tech savvy and may not know not even just tech savvy, just the procedures that the VA has. There's certain steps that you have to follow, and if you're not well versed in that, because who sits there and studies this stuff, right? Like it's not something that your typical person's going to do. You're just not going to know that. And then now, okay, not only are you a person like you mentioned who might have difficulty working, or anxiety or other issues that you're dealing with that are affecting your work or your personal life or whatever. Now all of a sudden you have to go study how to file for disability ratings in order to get that, and that just doesn't seem like where your time is best spent, right? And so I know it's a struggle for a lot of veterans when they're going through this, and it's I mean, don't even get me started on the VA rating math and how all that works, right? And I understand it. I understand why it works the way it works, but it makes a lot of people just scratch their head like this. 50 plus 50 does not equal 100, and that just doesn't make sense to some people, right? And so so there's that side of the struggle, but there's also the struggle of folks who maybe didn't always have the documentation from when they were in the service. If they got an injury, but they just kind of brushed it off and they didn't really think it was a big deal. But then a few years later, it becomes a big deal. How big of a problem is that lack of documentation when it comes to VA claims like this?
A great question. So it really varies, but for many people, inadequate documentation is a huge problem. Interestingly, I was a civilian contractor at a naval hospital at a Marine base for 7 years part-time. And I used to see this all the time with active duty Marines where they would get an injury and they were basically told, you're a Marine, suck it up, go take some ibuprofen, you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
And for those of you who listening who are veterans, I'm sure you've heard that. That's a very, very common thing to hear. And so it does a couple of things. One is it tries to keep people working, right, despite an injury, but it also creates a lack of documentation. And one of the things that I know as a physician, but also working at REE Medical, is disabilities don't get better over time. They generally get worse over time. And so you may have rolled your ankle 20 years ago, or crashed a Humvee, or gone parachuting and had multiple hard landings, or you name it, any host of problems. And those get worse over time. They start bad and they get worse. And if you don't have the documentation, you may not get a service connection in the first place, meaning the VA may not consider it their fault, right? And they may not take responsibility for it. Or if you do get service connection, you're lucky enough to be able to establish that with some documentation, getting the full rating that you deserve is a problem. Right. Secondarily, the VA doesn't give automatic increases because time went by. You know, if you're 40% today and 10 years go by, they don't say, oh, now you must be 50 or 60%. Let's just give that to you. It's not a thing. You have to go prove that. You have to go and see a VA doctor or a private medical doctor, get the medical evidence, get your examination, and submit the correct DBQs with, to your point, the right verbiage to show that. So then they can say, oh, okay, well, it did get worse, and now you meet this higher level, so we're going to bump your disability rating up. So documentation is critical.
Yeah. So for the folks who are listening who are still in the military, if you had any sorts of bumps and bruises or anything like that took place, doesn't matter how insignificant you might think it is, go get it documented. And if you're in any sort of leadership position in a capacity, encourage your folks who are under you to go and do the same thing, because that's just gonna screw them down the road. As they get older, like you said, things don't get better with time necessarily. Like they typically get worse, and so you want to look out for those folks. Yeah, sure, maybe they're going to be out for a half hour, an hour from training or whatever. Let them go do that and let them take care of that stuff, because that'll have a huge impact on them down the road.
I think one of the things that gets in the way sometimes is people are worried about looking like they're whiny or they're complainers. And the other thing is people are worried about injuries or problems that get documented getting in their way of promotions. And that's a huge factor for some people. So I think it's important that they balance that with, first and foremost, getting the medical care that they need acutely, and secondarily, getting a documentation, a paper trail, so that they can get the disability benefits later on, because you're in the military for a finite period of time, but this is going to affect them for the rest of their lives.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And, I think to your point that even when things are documented, sometimes veterans feel like their current disability rating may not reflect how bad things have gotten over time, because again, those things don't necessarily get better as you age. I mean, as I've gotten older, I've noticed that things aren't quite working the same that they used to when I was 20, so so things definitely get worse over time. How common is it for someone's conditions to worsen after they leave the service? They may have been in the service, maybe didn't really have an issue, but then years later their back starts acting up, or their knees or something starts acting up on them, which they can directly attribute to, like you said, if they were doing some parachuting or something and there's several hard landings, they're like, that's exactly where it hurt before, and that's the type of thing. How common is that type of situation?
Extremely common, because what happens is when you're new to the military and you're 18, you're 20, you're young, you're basically elastic, so to speak, and you'll get injuries and typically bounce back from them pretty quickly. But there is a cumulative effect. Think about it. Let's say you get an injury and you recover 99%, and your next injury you recover 95%, the next one's 98%. You have these small cumulative effects that take their toll over time. And maybe when you're 25, you don't really feel it too much, but when you're 55, you just might. So it's an extremely common problem. Mm-hmm. And again, get it documented, right? Get the care that you might need acutely, and then get it documented so that way you can be treated appropriately later on with the right disability benefits.
Yeah, and another thing for the folks who are still in the military, not only get it documented, but get a copy of that and keep it yourself. I have a whole folder of all my documentation from any medical appointments that I had in the military, and I wasn't great at keeping these things, but the things that managed to scrounge up, I kept in a folder, and even since then I've scanned them and I have them saved on my computer. So even if God forbid there's a fire or something like that, that the papers burn up, I still have the documentation somewhere. So, get it documented, have it available, so that way, you have that to kind of fall back on and keep those copies, because you never know. Sometimes they grow legs and they walk away.
That happens. That happens.
You may not be able to find it again. So, no, you know, there are people who will go to a private doctor and they'll get that kind of documentation as far as, yeah, my knee was messed up or my back was messed up. As far as VA goes, the private doctors are just as good as the VA doctors as far as their diagnosis of whatever the condition is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Not only are private medical doctors fully capable of taking care of patients and documenting things, Congress made it an act. They passed an act many years ago that said that when the VA is looking at kind of adjudicating these cases and making a determination for somebody's disability level, they must consider private medical evidence, meaning documentation from private doctors,
Mm-hmm.
equal to VA medical evidence. So whether they go see a VA doctor or a private medical doctor, it must be considered equally. So, for example, you see a VA doctor while you're or a military doctor while you're active duty, a VA doctor afterwards. You see a couple private medical doctors for various issues, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. It's all accepted the exact same way by a mandate from Congress.
That's great too, because sometimes those things happen where you do get out and you end up going to a doctor and you might be able to tie that back to military service, but you want to be able to say, hey, this is the diagnosis, and you get that from your civilian doctor, and that's a just as valid as whatever the VA or the military was able to provide for you. And so for someone who thinks that they might need to have their rating reviewed, maybe they currently have a rating that they think is too low for what it is that they are going through, or maybe they don't have a rating at all because they're just so confused by the whole process and they didn't even know where to start. What does the process actually look like once when they contact REE Medical? How do they get the ball rolling, and what does that process look like?
Yeah, so our team is actually highly trained to do an evaluation to see if we want to make sure that our services are not going to be a waste of the person's time.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll start off by asking a handful of questions. If somebody can pull up their e-benefits, their electronic benefits, that'll show, okay, they have these 1, 2, 3, 4 things that are service-connected disabilities, and here's their current rating for it. That's very helpful. And then we'll ask key questions to help understand what the VA may consider them a candidate for. So, for example, maybe your back pain is rated at 10%. The potential is maybe 40%. And there are key things that the VA is going to need to understand to say, you're appropriate for a 10% or 20% or 40% rating. And we'll ask those questions. Mm-hmm. We, of course, cannot guarantee an outcome of for the VA, that the VA will make your determination, but we know what they look for. We're specifically trained to understand what they look for. We'll ask those questions, and then we'll go back to the veterans about their disability or multiple disabilities and say, look, based on the VA criteria and based on what you're saying, and of course, this will all need to be authenticated by a physician exam, and the VA will have to make their determination. But what you're saying matches up with the VA disability rating level of X, whatever that number is. Now, maybe you're at 30% today and X is 90%. So there you go. So you know that it looks like it's a worthwhile chase, so to speak. It's worthwhile to have an examination, pool the medical records, and get new disability paperwork to submit to the VA. Again, we don't guarantee ratings because we can't, right? We're not the VA ourselves. But I would say we are excellent at giving estimates.
Yeah, and that was a thing that I found very useful as well, was the kind of pre-screening questions that you were talking about, to kind of get a feel for, is this even worth going down this road and doing all the physician appointments and the paperwork and all the things that need to go into this? Is it even worth it? Because if the likelihood was I'm already rated where I should be, then not worth going into it anymore because there's nothing to increase at that point. So, so you can just kind of end it there, and
Yeah, and we can do
that's
that
great.
on a disability by disability basis.
Sure.
So if you have four disabilities, it may be the case that the VA may consider you appropriately rated for three of them, but not for the fourth one,
Yep.
or whatever your case may happen to be. And that fourth one may be a benefit to get reevaluated because it can potentially increase the rating for that specific disability and your overall rating.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. One thing I appreciated when I went through this process with you guys was just how streamlined everything was. The paperwork, the medical side of things, getting the appointment with the doctor. I think you said, most cases you can get an appointment with a physician within a week or two, and that was my case too. It was somewhere within a week or two. I forget exactly what the time period was, but it was around that time period. So, a lot of times you go get set up with your doctor, it's like they may not have an appointment available for a couple months, and now you're just waiting, and it's like that's kind of a pain. So, I was able to get in real quick. The appointment was quick and painless, and just really reviewing everything and making sure that everything was accurate and whatnot, and so everything was just streamlined, and that's just the best way I can describe it. And so, can you explain how you guys handle the evaluations and the paperwork and all that stuff, so just to make it less overwhelming for the veteran?
Yeah, so we have various teams of people that handle each component of this, and they're all specifically trained in it. Our intake coordinators, like I said, will do that initial evaluation to make sure that we're not wasting your time and that's
Mm-hmm.
going to be a benefit for you. And then once an individual does sign up with us, we actually assign them a navigator. And what that person does is a single point of contact. So you can submit your medical records or any paperwork you need to do directly to us, to our computer system or to your navigator. And that navigator will make sure that we have all the paperwork that we need, both the agreement between us and the veteran, as well as collected all the correct paperwork, the medical records, and so forth. And then we have a team of people that will process the paperwork and get it all sorted out, because sometimes people will submit hundreds or 1,000+ pages of medical records, right? And we'll take them in electronically. We try not to handle actual paper, but we'll take them in electronically. We have kind of a medical records department that will help sort through all of that. And we get everything teed up and ready for the examination. Once we do feel that the paperwork is all ready to go, then we have a medical team that will identify the physician or physicians that are closest to that veteran, and basically make a match between the veteran and the medical or psych or both physicians, so that way the appointment can be scheduled. And then the veteran will go to those one or two appointments, and then the doctor will complete the paperwork. And then we have another team that does a final review. We want to make sure that the paperwork was filled out completely, pages or lines weren't missed, it has your name and not somebody else's name, all the HIPAA is correct, and so forth. So we check all of those things before we return these DBQs to the veteran electronically for the veteran to submit to the VA.
Yeah, and that was my experience as well. Was it there was that one point of contact that was able to kind of be the traffic cop for
Right.
all the paperwork and make sure everything was going to the right place, and make sure everyone was staying up to date, and the whole process or the progress of the process was being maintained. So it didn't seem like anything was falling through the cracks or being forgotten about. There was regular updates that I was getting. I would get emails or text messages or whatever from people on the team just to say, hey, just checking in, just make sure everything's good to go. On your end, if they're waiting for something from me, you have any questions? They were there and being proactive throughout the whole thing. So I thought that was just great. Now beyond, we're talking a lot about the the percentage increase, and that's obviously tied to a monthly payment that the veteran gets, which obviously that's a benefit. That's something that is a good thing. Who doesn't want more money, right? I don't think I don't think I've ever met anyone who said I'm overpaid, or I'm getting too much money. Like, no. So getting that increase is obviously a good benefit there. But what are some of the additional benefits that come with a higher VA disability rating that maybe some veterans might not be aware of?
There can be a lot of them, actually. For example, and it does vary based on geography.
Sure.
Certain areas, Texas as an example, if you have a certain disability rating, you don't have to pay property tax. And that's a huge savings right there. The GI Bill can kick in. Obviously, as a veteran, you can get healthcare, free healthcare through the VA. There's a lot of different things that you can be a candidate for over and above money, but and we can certainly give more specific answers, but I will say that it does vary a little bit state to state. Different areas have different benefits. So I think it's important for us to understand where a veteran lives to help answer that question.
Yeah, but I think some of the things that you mentioned are good things to be aware of, because even things like the VA medical care is something that if you have a certain percentage rating, you are now eligible to be able to receive your even just your regular annual checkups, or other exams, routine exams for different conditions that you might have. Could all be done through the VA, and if that's where you choose to go. Obviously, if you have private insurance and you prefer to go someplace else, you can always do that too. But it opens up options for you. So,
Absolutely.
God forbid you got laid off from your job and you lost that, that insurance through your employer, or whatever the case may be. You still have access to that. You still have that availability. So,
Yeah.
you don't want to just dismiss that like, oh well, I don't need it right now. It doesn't mean that you won't need it somewhere down the line, right? So,
Yeah, and I don't want to minimize the monthly disability check
sure.
either. I mean, obviously that's a big thing. We deal with a lot of veterans who are homeless. We deal with veterans who are almost homeless, and that extra bit of money that they make keeps them housed. It makes a big difference. We also deal with a lot of veterans who have depression, suicidality. I mean, that's a huge problem in that world. And I would actually argue that if you are active duty and you come back home having seen and done what you've done, maybe with PTSD, possibly anxiety, depression, stress, whatever it might happen to be, and then you can't provide for your family because the job you have, you're getting fired, or it's inadequate pay, or you can only work limited hours because of your disabilities. A lot of times getting the correct disability rating, and therefore an appropriate amount of a disability check each month, that can make a huge difference in their
Sure.
lives, their emotional well-being, sometimes save their lives because they won't necessarily take their own life.
Yeah, no, that's certainly true. And if you could take that financial burden, or reduce that financial burden that someone might have,
Right.
and especially when you're talking about someone who's trying to get back into the civilian world and try to figure out how to navigate this crazy world that we we live in. We we sometimes forget about the fact that money, everyone needs it, and not everyone has enough of it, and sometimes that could mean they're going to lose their home. That might cause strain in relationships, their marriage, or with kids, or whatever the case may be, and that could just spiral down a hole that you don't want to go down. So having that little bit extra money could be the difference between losing all of those things I just mentioned, losing your home, losing a relationship, all those things, or not, and that
Mhm.
could be a huge benefit. And so I know we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but with the intake process and the kind of the pre-screening that goes on, but not everyone will qualify for an increase. They may be appropriately rated, or if they don't have a rating and they don't have any documentation of anything, they may not qualify for a rating. And so when they go through that intake process and you guys kind of determine that they're probably not a good candidate for a higher rating, that's sort of like the end of it, or is there kind of more to the process with that?
So it doesn't have to be the end. First of all, just because we're estimating that the VA won't give them an increase, again, we can't guarantee that.
Sure.
There is always a little wiggle room that maybe they will. So if somebody's already 100% disabled, that's the ceiling, right? I mean,
Sure.
you can get P&T, which is permanent in total, so it can't get taken away from them. And we've had people approach us who are 100% but want to get 100% P&T. So, they can try. We can't guarantee that the VA will give that to them, of course, but they can
Sure.
try. Other people may be under 100% and from what we're seeing, based on what they're telling us in the VA criteria, they don't seem like they would likely be given an increase by the VA. If they want to try, they can.
Mhm.
I'm not expecting success at that point in time. And it's a lot, it's an exam or two, it's some paperwork, it's some time. So they may not feel that it's worthwhile. Generally, if we don't see evidence of the VA wanting to, or them meeting criteria for a higher disability rating, most of the people will stop there. However, sometimes we'll point them in direction of additional resources, not so much to increase their disability rating, but maybe they didn't know they can have free homeowners, property tax,
Sure.
or maybe whatever it might happen to be. So sometimes we'll point them in a direction of additional resources like that. But as far as this process is concerned, generally most people will stop if it doesn't seem like there's criteria for an increase.
Right, but to your point, if someone does qualify, for example, for free property tax, that isn't necessarily income coming to them, but it's an expense that they don't have to pay now, and so
Right.
that helps financially as well. So,
Absolutely.
having you guys point them in the right direction for that is just another benefit, and I think that's awesome. Now, what I do want to mention is that there are some companies out there who are they have a different model from what you guys have, and they go in and they'll do some of the similar things that you guys do, but then they go and take a cut of the veterans' back pay when they help process through some of these claims. Your guys' model is totally different from that. Talk to us a little bit about that and how you guys kind of approach this model, and how you're not predatory in that regard in terms of going and latching onto a veteran's back pay or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, great question. And I think we are different than the vast majority of companies out there. For point of reference, like I said, I'm an emergency room doctor and I was a medical director of a few emergency rooms. So I come from a compliance background. And so when I started doing this, one of the first things I did is look to the VA and Congress to say, what's compliant behavior? If
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do this, what's compliant? Because I don't want it to backfire on the veteran, nor do I want it to backfire on me or now my company and my staff. And turns out that there are other business models out there that are not compliant. And I will say, because I head the lobbying front of my company, I do work with Washington, D.C. and state legislators and attorney generals and so forth. There are a lot of models out there, and there are a lot of people trying to defend the various models. And both federally and various states are trying to pass legislation to define what's appropriate and what's legal.
Hmm.
I will say that the narrative changed a little bit, where for a little while, the government was basically saying, let's get rid of the private sector. There's companies, and I'll explain the details, but there are companies out there taking advantage of veterans. Let's get rid of the entire sector, get rid of them. And then now they're starting to realize, wait a minute, the VA is not all things for veterans. There's a lot of shortcomings, despite their well-intended efforts.
Mm-hmm.
And even with the benefit and support of veteran service organizations or even accredited attorneys, these veterans are still not getting all the benefits that they deserve. So, yeah, now we realize the private sector should exist. So, how do we have them behave? Now, the VA actually cannot handle the caseload that they're working on when veterans try and get this increase. And they do work with a handful of private sector companies and give them cases to do exams on, basically. And they'll do a fee-for-service model. You set up a physician exam for this person, and we will pay you X number of dollars. Fee-for-service. REE Medical, my company, is set up as a fee-for-service company. It's the world I grew up in medicine, and it is the most compliant model out there. What's nice about it is you know what you're paying. I mean, imagine going to the store to buy an item and they say, take the item. We're not going to tell you what the charge is. You go home and use it, and then we'll tell you the charge after the fact. And by the way, the more you like it, the more you use it, the more I'm going to charge you, even though the item doesn't change. Personally, I don't like that model. I think it's unfair to the veteran. You should know how much you're paying for what you're getting, right?
Exactly.
And so we're fixed fee for service. I will say there is one variable. If you see just a medical doctor or just a psych doctor, it's a fee. If you happen to have to see both of them, there's an extra fee for that because we're paying two doctors. And,
Sure.
I'll tell you from experience, doctors are not cheap. So, there's that. Having said that, we're fee for service and we're not contingent. And here's what contingent means. Okay. Contingent sounds great on the surface until you break it down. So here's what contingent means. So you're a veteran going to go through this process. I'll charge you nothing up front. when you're done, whatever increase the VA gives you, if they don't give you an increase, I will not give you a bill. Okay? No harm.
Mm-hmm.
Took a little time, didn't cost you any money. If they do give you an increase, then I'll give you a bill. But the bigger of an increase, the bigger the bill. And there's two models. The most common model is I'm going to charge you whatever monthly increase they give you, I'm going to charge you 5 times that. If your if your check goes up by $1,000 a month, your bill's $5,000. If it goes up by $2,000 a month, I'm going to charge you $2,000, whatever the case may be for you. Okay. The other model is a percentage of your back pay. Okay. So let's say you can get up to a year's worth of back pay. Back pay is not guaranteed, but you can get up to a year's worth of back pay. So if you don't get an increase, we don't bill you. If you do get an increase, we get, let's say, 25% of that back pay. Mm-hmm. Challenge with that, those sound nice because there's no risk if you don't get an increase. The challenge is it ends up being very expensive. If you get a big increase, you might pay $8, $10, $12, $15, $20,000 for the service. Okay. And for the back pay, well, hold on a minute. So the faster a company processes your case, the fewer months of back pay, the smaller the bill. So in a way, it incentivizes those companies to slow down the process, spread it out to 12 months, maximize their fee, right? Which I think is a harm, right? I think it's a harm for the veteran, and the veteran doesn't gain anything positive out of that. So for us, we are fee for service. We are not contingent. So whatever your increase is, you keep it. But having said that, it allows us to also be significantly cheaper. We are about 25 to 50% the average cost of most companies out there, our charge to the veteran. So it allows us to be much less expensive to the veterans and fixed pricing so you know what you're paying for.
Yeah, and I think that model, in my opinion anyways, and everyone is welcome to have their own opinion, but that model makes the most sense to me. Like you said, I don't walk into the grocery store and just grab something off the shelf having no idea what the cost is and then get charged for it based on how much I enjoyed it, after the fact. I don't buy the ice cream and have a, nice big bowl of ice cream and really enjoy it, and then I get a $500 bill for the ice cream, right? Like that would be ridiculous. Yeah. I go into the store, I see what it is. If it's a price that I'm comfortable with paying, then great, I'll pay it, and I'll take it home and I'll enjoy it, and my family gets to enjoy it, and everything like that. If not, then I just don't buy it. And
yeah, now an important thing to realize is one of the reasons why veteran service organizations, Congress, and other people had a emotional challenge with the concept of private sector companies billing veterans at all is because they don't. You can go to the VA and pay them nothing.
Right.
The challenge is, I would say, you get what you pay for.
Sure.
Right? So if you go to the VA and they don't charge you, and by the way, they're reimbursed. They're reimbursed by the taxpayer. And veteran service organizations are reimbursed, just not by the veteran. They get private donations. So it's not like money doesn't flow through these entities. It's just a sourcing issue, right? So they said, well, how dare the private sector bill the veteran when if they go to a veteran service organization or the VA directly, it's free? Mm-hmm. Well, here's the problem with that. They're not wrong with what they're saying as far as it being free for the veteran to go to the VSO or to the VA. But if it takes 5 years to get the increase, or you'd never get the full increase that you deserve, think about it. If you're supposed to get an extra $1,000 a month for 5 years and you didn't get it, you've lost out on a huge amount of money, $60,000. Right. Okay? So would you rather go to a private sector company like REE Medical, pay them a few bucks, and then collect almost all of that $60,000, or fight the fight with the VA? Right. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't want to be misunderstood. I am not saying don't try it with the VA or a VSO, or for that matter, an accredited attorney. The majority of people that come to REE Medical have tried it, but for whatever reason, it was unsuccessful for them. Sure. If you want to come to us first and foremost, straight off the bat, we're here. We're happy to do it. But most people do try it through these free choices and have not been successful and then come to us.
Right. And to your point, time is money, literally in this case, where the more time you wait, the less money you collect. And, like you said, if it's a process that took you 5 years with a potential $1,000 increase per month, that is $60,000 loss that you have. Right. You at the end of that 5 years, you would have had $60,000 more dollars that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And so, yeah, to me, it just makes sense to pay up front, get it done, get it over with. I don't look the VA medical process is not an enjoyable process for anybody. I don't care who you are, unless you like to torture yourself, somehow. Like, it's just not an enjoyable process. I don't want it dragging out for 5 years. I don't want it dragging out for any length of time longer than it needs to. And so, if you can do this up front and just get it done, get it over with, that to me anyways just seems like the way to go. And that's honestly, that was one of the big things that drew me to REE Medical and how you guys work, because I just really wanted to get the process moving and get it over with, and not be worried about this appointment or that appointment or this paperwork or whatever. And did I remember to submit it? Did I do stuff in time? Did I whatever it was that needed to happen? I just want to be done and over with, and check the box and move on. And here we are. And within just a couple months, obviously part of that wait time is waiting on the VA for a decision, but within a couple months I had a decision, and it was good to go. And now I don't have to think about it anymore. It's done. It's over, and I can move on and live life. So it's just great how you guys work. And I do encourage folks who are listening to this who either don't have a rating and think they deserve one, or don't have the rating that they deserve. They think there should be an increase. Definitely reach out to REE Medical. There will be a link in the show notes for REE Medical, so you can check them out and just find out more information. Do your due diligence and do your research. Make sure that you're going through the right company for you. But if you're asking me, I would highly recommend REE Medical for everything that you guys have done and how you guys work. So definitely an awesome organization.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. But before we wrap up, any last kind of closing words or anything that you want to leave the audience with? Either about the process, about REE Medical, or anything like that.
Yeah, actually, one comment is we've heard a number of times from people, you know what? I'm not that bad off.
Sure.
Let somebody else get the benefits. I don't need them. It's okay. And I'll tell you, an individual getting benefits does not take away from any other individuals. Right? If you deserve it, you should have it. You're not taking it away from anybody else. Not doing it benefits nobody. It just hurts you. So it's definitely worth a try. And I'd argue that we make it so easy for veterans. Give us a call for free. We will do that initial evaluation and let you know if it seems like the VA would consider you a candidate for an increase. So there's no harm. There's no obligation. Talk to us. We're happy to have the conversation. And if you want to use us, we're here. If you decide that it's not worth it for you, or the VA doesn't, maybe the VA wouldn't give you an increase, that's fine. Mm-hmm. But we are happy to have that conversation with as many veterans for free as possible.
That's awesome. And that's a great point that you mentioned there too, that you're not taking away from somebody else who might be, quote unquote, worse off than you. You're all you're really doing is you're taking care of yourself and allowing the country, really. We made that promise to all of our service members when they signed up. It's like, we're going to take care of you. If your service messes you up, we're going to take care of you, afterwards. And we're allowing the country to make good on that promise. So that's really, I think, the benefit that we're.
Yeah. And you're taking care of yourself, but you're also taking care of your family. That money goes a long way. And I would also say that if you're a family member of a veteran, encourage them to call, help them call, jump on the phone with them. If that's going to be supportive to them, we're happy to do that.
Absolutely. That's a great point there too. So, well, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing how REE Medical is making a real difference for veterans who are seeking the benefits that they deserve. And going through this process is not an easy one, but it's great when you have someone on your side who's gone through the process and knows all the things that are going to get you tripped up and can help navigate that process for you. So that's definitely an awesome organization. Thank you for doing what you do and doing it the way that you do it, because I think that's definitely an important distinction, is how you guys work.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. And thanks for having me on with you. Really appreciate the time.
You bet. Thanks.